This is not just another government project. It is the next indispensable pillar of our economic revival. Initially, the government has allocated 750 million from the budget of 2025 for this initiative, and the proposal for the National Planning Department for this proposal has submitted for 2026 and 27. Your presence here today, it is the clearest possible signal of a shared commitment across our government, a commitment to excellence, efficiency, and evidence-based policymaking. We have already completed the vital first step, the joint selection of projects for our National Quality Infrastructure Framework. I want to acknowledge the foundational work of the expert panel led by Mr. Komudu from Ministry of Trade, along with Dr. Mubarak, Dr. Hairo, and Dr. Sanjeeva and Mrs. Manisha from SLAB. On this critical foundation, this framework encompasses standard, metrology, accreditation, and conformity is the backbone of trust in our products and services. Our products and services, locally and internationally, we are laying the groundwork for more competitive, innovative, and substantial economy. But a foundation, no matter how strong, needs a blueprint. A strong foundation needs a good plan. That's where RIA comes in. Regulatory impact assessment comes in. Now we move to the next and arguably most vital stage, ensuring the regulatory environment support the success of these quality infrastructure initiatives. This is where regulatory impact assessment becomes our indispensable tool. Thank Dr. Hairo and his dedicated team from UNIDO, with technical support of the European Union funded by BEPSA food projects. Thank you for helping us turn this workshop into a reality.
Today, here we are gathered to learn a process where we can make some sort of a mechanism which facilitate the citizens, protect Sri Lanka, and facilitate trade. So I am looking these particular workshops from the trade perspective. Generally, you can see the regulations should not be weaker, prohibitive, but should be facilitative. In Sri Lanka, you can see some regulations are very weak. Right? Today, you can see substandard products are available in the market. And Sri Lankans are mostly suffer from non-communicable diseases. Why? So we have a weaker regulatory mechanism. In certain cases, we have a prohibitive regulatory mechanisms. So we need to avoid this weaker as well as prohibitive mechanism. If we want to avoid these two and come to the facilitative regulatory mechanism, then we must know what are the impact of our each and every regulations. So today the workshops standing on that point from my perspective. And also today we are in the global economy where global value chains are there. Now if you look at, we are exporting the tea, that is a wholly obtained product from our soil we are taking and giving to the end user. But of course we are exporting the bulk in a different way and valued it in some other country. But today the moving trend with the globalization and the global value chain, countries are trying to produce components, where we are trying to compete to export intermediate goods, not the finished product. So if we want to export your intermediate goods, that means, say there are 10 components, Sri Lanka exporting only 2 components. So 8 components are produced from other countries. So now we need to produce the 2 components to match with the other 8 components. So where the regulatory mechanism or the standard, some other way we can say, need to come. Therefore, every regulation when we make, we need to understand why we are making, how we are going to implement, who are the stakeholders, and what kind of impact will be reach them. So it is normally a good governance principles. You must know why you are making. And there is I think you all know, there is a World Trade Organization came out with the Trade Facilitation Agreement. The Trade Facilitation Agreements, there are certain principles. There are 36 elements, 12 categories, where you can see they impose the transparency elements. When you talk about the transparency, it will come with the stakeholder consultations and also not affecting any stakeholder, including the exported market. Today, I think I used to talk to Dr. Cairo, the EU funded projects coming here. Actually, they have a dual purpose. While ensuring Sri Lanka produce a quality product, they also ensuring safer food goods exported to their citizens. Therefore, it is a win-win situation. So we as Sri Lankan need to maximize the benefit out of these projects. I know there are large number of participants. Number of participants are coming from the closed department where you have continuously worked. And another group of participants, they are on a transferable service. So today you are getting trained here. If you are on a transferable service, if you tomorrow you leave the particular institution and go to other ministry, how are you going to apply? Therefore, please think about that also. The other point I want to emphasize, now here mostly I see the middle range officers. So when you learn, sometimes your head of the department or the higher decision-making authority may not aware of the particular principles. Therefore, it is your duty to tell them whenever they ask you to prepare a regulation or standards or rules, see whether that particular rules fall into this, but you are going to discuss and impart in your knowledge today and tomorrow. Because that only when we learn, I think Sri Lanka mostly literal and we are learn more. But the issue is whether we are putting to the practice. Sometimes when we exit from the hotel, we forgot what we learned here. And when we enter to our department, we are falling to the previous status quo. So we need to avoid that one if we want to change ourselves. Therefore, please take maximum benefit out of this program and establish a group of people, right? I just went through the Ms. Rodrigo's introductory part. She said that she has a 25 years experience in regulatory mechanism. So why one of you can't come out that basis? So take that point also and learn and facilitate our process to get the benefit for the country.
Think about why you have this, and I also want to present a trash can full of papers, pieces of papers on the floor. So why do we want, or why do we have regulations? We want regulations, and this is my personal opinion, and we can become very technical. I'm sure Delia will introduce all the definitions and all the technical terminology. In my opinion, it's just to shape behavior. We want people to start doing things that are right or stop doing things that are wrong in this case, we think that recycling could be a good idea instead of throwing away pieces of paper. Regulations are ubiquitous. We see regulations everywhere. One of the most heavily regulated sectors is transportation. We all know that all the vehicles must pass several tests, designs, standards, and ensure that at the end they comply with many, many regulations. But it's not only vehicles, it's not only products or manufacturers. We as well as users, when we get into a car, we need to buckle our seat belts, and otherwise we might get a fine. No, we have Sri Lankan police or any other traffic police enforcing these regulations, and it's not really because there's a policeman that I buckle my seat. I understand that if I buckle my seat and I get into a car accident, my chances of survival are higher. I know that myself, so I'm not doing it because I'm scared of a fine. This is just a graph in which it shows that before the 70s, there was a rising trend on the number of people that were killed in road traffic accidents. And this is a chart from Germany. So since 1970, this number of casualties has been reducing 88%. And you can see here all the regulations that were enforced, were enacted those days, that helped into this process. It's just to say, well, regulations actually work. There's a problem. Somehow governments come into an agreement to establish a regulation, restrict some of these behaviors or try to foster these type of practices, and then things happen in a positive way. But can we have bad regulations? That's a question that we also should ask. So we know now why we have regulations. We know that regulations work. They actually come up with good outcomes. But what happens if we have bad regulations? This is just an example from the US when in the early 1920s they banned alcohol. They were saying, oh, there's family disruption. People are getting drunk. There's crime in the street. People, even religious motives were alleged to put this ban into place. So no alcohol. So what happened then? Crime rose, and then a lot of organizations, you know, very famous Al Capone crime syndicate came, and it was chaos, basically. Finally, they decided, well, I think there's no point on keeping this regulation in force. Let's abolish that regulation. There are other ways to regulate better the alcohol, and I'm not saying that should just, you know, liberalize alcohol consumption and production, but there are different ways instead of prohibiting something. Just to quote Mark Twain, the prohibition makes anything precious. I also have to mention this. No, I don't think it's a secret that Sri Lanka suffered with a ban of conventional pesticides and fertilizers in 2021. I was here. I've been here 8 years. I saw firsthand how this was affecting the whole country. Food security was in jeopardy. Prices were on the rise. You know, economic turmoil. We all know what happened. No, at the end, a few months later, they decided to reverse that regulation. So there's a lot of ways in which the government can play into how to shape these behaviors: rules, policy, standards, regulations, compliance. But at the same time, as the Secretary mentioned, we don't want to impose excessive burden to companies, consumers, or any other part of stakeholder in society. We don't want to have a very, very heavy regulations. We also know that not only for trade, as the Secretary mentioned, also investment correlates with good institutional governance. So the better regulatory framework you have, the more investors will try to set here companies, and the economy can grow again. I think also very important is the regulatory development process is a meaningful opportunity for engagement, not only with the private sector, obviously when you regulate the private sector, but actually all the stakeholders. And I would say that even you can gain trust when you do the proper, open, transparent, participatory regulatory process, and it can become a communicational tool. So it's not only about working with the private sector companies, but also working with the people. You would know Why is this important? Why this regulation will protect you? Well, it's going to protect the environment or any other, trying to solve any other problem. So it's very important that the government also see this as an opportunity, not only for the private sector engagement, but also the public. I also have to say that sometimes regulations are linked to corruption. Why? There are many reasons, but if we have clarity in the institutional responsibilities, monitoring, compliance, and we know that in general, the officers are really buying into this and not seeing this as a burden, then we can streamline and we can, have anti-corruption policies. You can also think about very tight regulation, heavy, that there's no other way or very, very little space for people or companies to overcome this very burden, and most of the easy ways will be, okay, let's bribe an officer or something, and that's why also regulatory practices can prevent corruption. I also want to mention a few things just for you to think a little bit more. In the EU, there was a law that laid the quality standard for bananas. I come from Colombia, we produce also a lot of bananas, and they actually was a regulation in which they decided to enforce how the bananas looked like in terms of appearance, in terms of deformation, abnormal curvature, free from bruising, etc. They also measured size in length, thickness, etc. But there was no definition or guidance about what was considered abnormal. What was the consequences of this? If you want to control, if you want to decide what is the good quality, and it's only those good quality that is allowed to come into the country. So you can imagine a lot of, let's say, non-so-beautiful bananas were just discarded. After several years, in 2008, the European Commission then repealed these certain regulations related to quality of specific fruit and vegetables, including the ones that were related on shape and size. And according to the press release of the Commission, in this era of prices, growing demand makes no sense to throw these products away or destroy them. Or what the Commissioner said, this is a concrete example of our drive to cut red tape, and I will continue to push until it goes through. It shouldn't be the EU's job to regulate these things. It is far better to leave it to market operators. So no point on regulating this, and there was a lot of food losses because of this regulation. There's also many other initiatives on improving and reducing regulation in Australia in 2026 onwards through RIA. Over 1,000 redundant business licenses and permits were repealed. So you don't need to have over and over regulations or licenses, permits. They decided just to streamline that. In the United States, there's an act, Paperwork Reduction Act Reviews. So through RIAs or RIA-like exercises, they repeal redundant reporting requirement. An example for the OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, that were dropped after reviewing that the high cost and limited safety impact. There was no point in keeping those type of regulations. In the European Union, they have what is called the REFIT program, Regulatory Fitness and Performance. So they use RIA and export evaluation to assess what is actually the impact or the consequences that these regulations are bringing. And if they're not really reaching that objective, then they repeal it or they revise the regulation. An example on the milk quota. In the UK, Red Tape Challenge 2011 to 2014, over that 3,000 regulations were reviewed and 800 were scrapped or simplified. There was many examples here, but then you can see how important, and it's not only because the cost is paid by consumers or producers, it's also putting a heavy burden to the government itself. You have to monitor, you have to make market surveillance, you have to enforce the regulation. So if there's a regulation that is actually not working, it's better not to keep it. In Canada, regulatory modernization initiatives applying RIA, they have a one-for-one rule, so repeal one old regulation for every new one. And there's one example on outdated railway equipment inspection rules. Similarly, in New Zealand, they have a Resource Management Act that repealed some regulations that were not compliant, and they assessed the cost of having these proportionate costs compared to benefits. Secretary also mentioned NQI. That is why I think it's also important to know that NQI is another powerful tool for the government to use. You can keep consistency, predictability, and credibility, and it's all science-based. You already have a very strong and growing NQI in Sri Lanka, so why don't you use it? Very recently, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, last month, 2025, they published this very interesting report on how regulatory frameworks can be improved through standards, measurements, and quality assurance, NQI in general. So using, for example, standards as a background regulations through design, production, post-production, even throughout the life cycle of a product, you can improve regulatory development. Similarly, with NQI authorities, it can reduce the burden. You can use all these tools that you already have at hand for improving not only how regulations are developed, you can plan, but also in the terms of enforcement. Just an example, here from Japan, in the electrical safety part, they had a lot of items that were under regulation, and they're trying to shift from mandatory third-party conformity assessment certifications to a self-declaration, a supplier's declaration, that will be less burden. And it was not only an exercise just randomly taking away that very stringent mandatory requirements on certification. This was considering the effectiveness of post-market measures and also the sensitivity and the risk of this, the safety of these products. Secretary also mentioned about trade and how through NQI you can facilitate trade, for example, to mutual recognition agreements. This is again taking the example from Japan. Other conformity assessment body in a different country, third country, are having this assessment, whether it's testing or certification or inspection, then you can have a mutual recognition and have it valid in the country of destination. So this conformity compliance model, you can have different levels. You can have competent authority, very strong. You basically paying all the costs for the evaluation or surveillance for these regulations. Third-party driven, you can have third-party certification models, suppliers' declarations as well. The idea is for you to consider shifting in a paradigm. So it's not only to promote the very strong enforcement regulation, you can think again how to shift behavior in different ways. A voluntary compliance, for example, through education, engagement, communication. You can also assist compliance. You can have programs where you can have prizes, awards. You can have directed compliance, more specific tools to correct, prevent undesired behavior or promote in a very directed way. Or at the end, there's certain, if there's a remain of groups that don't want to comply, so those should be with an iron fist, apply the full extent of the law, enforce those regulations. So you can have this gradual approach, basically similar is here, where you don't have to use the full extent of the law. You can have a gradual, you have different programs. This is also why RIA is important. And at the end, you have to measure why is a good indicator of a successful regulatory program. Is the minimum use of enforcement measure, for example. This is a very compliant sector. Everybody is desiring to buckle up their seatbelt, and you don't have to have a policeman every corner to check if everyone is buckling up. Also, there should be preventive in nature. You can have these programs, and you should prevent this undesired, or you want to promote the desired behavior. Also, a collaborative approach. As I said, this can be a very powerful tool to communicate, but also to motivate the people. It should be predictable and it should be risk-based. In general, it's a very collaborative approach. Now you can engage, it's your duty to bring people in. The transparency also brings confidence to the people. And again, for me, this has been a very wonderful opportunity. Congratulations again, Secretary and Minister. I wish you a very exciting workshop.
It is with great pleasure that I join you today as this national workshop on regulatory impact assessment, organized under the guidance of the Ministry of Science and Technology in collaboration with United Nations Industrial International Development Organization, UNIDO, with the technical support of the European Union, funded BESPA Food Project. This gathering brings together policymakers, regulators, industry leaders, academics, and civil society representatives to deliberate on one of the most critical aspects of good governance: how we design, assess, and implement regulations that support sustainable economic growth, innovation, and well-being of our citizens. As many of you are aware, Sri Lanka has embarked on strengthening its national quality infrastructure. The system of standards, metrology, accreditation, conformity assessment, and market surveillance that ensures our products and services are safe, reliable, and competitive in both domestic and international markets. NQI is not merely a technical subject. It is the backbone of trust in our economy. It provides the confidence that our farmers, manufacturers, and exporters need when assessing regional and global value chains. It assures consumers that what they purchase meet quality and safety requirements. It gives government the tool to protect society and the environment while promoting fair trade. In parallel, regulatory impact assessment is a key mechanism to ensure that the rules we introduce are evidence-based, cost-effective, and beneficial to society. Poorly designed regulations can hinder innovation, discourage investment, and burden businesses unnecessarily. On the other hand, well-crafted regulations informed by RIA can stimulate competitiveness, safeguard the environment, and encourage sustainable industrial growth. This national RIA initiative is the first of its kind in Sri Lanka, representing the coordinated national efforts to address regulatory effectiveness, ensure evidence-based policy making, and align our policies with international best practices. This workshop is therefore an important milestone in building Sri Lanka's capacity for regulatory excellence. Though pilot projects and knowledge sharing, we are learning how to evaluate the economic, social, and environmental impacts of proposed guidelines before they are implemented. This process promotes transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness, values that are central to democratic governance.